Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of Ask a Specialist. Today, we are going to be talking about picky eaters. And if you have your own children, or have you ever been around other kids, or you might work with kids, you will know that I think it's safe to say that everybody has had some type of issue with a picky eater at some point. And some of those are just small issues, and some of them are big. And so today we're hoping to talk about some of the underlying causes and give you some different strategies that will help you talk about the stress and anxiety it can cause for families and kids alike, and give you some coping strategies, and just talk about food and kids' introduction to food and how we can make that a more positive experience for everybody. And as you may know, Las Cumbres has been in our community for 50 years. We just had our 50th birthday celebration, and we serve northern New Mexico, Rio Arriba, Taos, Santa Fe, Los Alamos, and we offer lots of different services. We're focusing on kids birth to 6 years old for this particular series, and we're just glad you're with us today. I am Patty Delgado. I'm an occupational therapist. I have been in early intervention for the past 20 or so years, and I love my job. I love what I do, and just like to be able to share what I know. And then I'd like to introduce my colleague, Julie Holyfield. She is a speech and language pathologist. She's been a speech and language pathologist for 23 years and has been in early intervention for 20 years. She's had extensive training in feeding. She even holds an award with the American Speech and Hearing Association for continuing education in pediatric feeding. And she's also a graduate of the Medically Fragile Feeding Institute. So as you see, she's had a lot of experience. And so together, hopefully we can give you all some information that you can use. And I just want to let you know that if you have questions throughout this presentation, you can enter them in the chat. And if you want to you can send them to everybody, or you can send them just to Julie and me, and we can look at them and try to answer those for you. All right.
All right. I want to thank Patty. Patty is a registered occupational therapist. And when we talk about feeding, we talk about feeding being a team. And it often takes more than one therapist. It takes our PT, our OT, and Patty has brought a wealth of knowledge into Las Cumbres and helping on feeding teams, from everything from hand to mouth to posture to seating to sensory. So I just want to really acknowledge Patty's knowledge in the area of feeding as well. So thank you, Patty. I want to start this morning talking a bit about how I became passionate in feeding. I was a speech language pathologist working in early intervention, and I worked with children with feeding the way we worked with feeding 20 years ago. But 14 and a half years ago, I had my second child, and my child was born on his due date, 25th percentile in weight and height, and in a month was not even on the growth chart and was actually showing -10 on the growth chart. And our battle with feeding really began at that point. And we had about a week or two to get some weight on, or we were looking at a feeding tube. And I can tell you at that time, it was incredibly challenging. As a mom, I know it was challenging for him as a baby. We were on 30-minute oral feedings around the clock because that's about all he could do. He had, had his own set of ways of keeping himself safe and comfortable. And it's been a journey. pH probes and reflux studies and tonsils and adenoids. But I have to say he's 14 and a half years old and in my kitchen all the time eating, despite, asthma and steroids. He's a multi-sport player and he's loves to cook and eat. So the journey can be long, it can be short, but I can definitely tell you the feeding journey can impact a family. It impacts families in where they can eat, how they can eat, when they can eat, when there is an oral sensory feeder or a picky eater in your home, or a child with feeding challenges. It doesn't necessarily, picky eating often starts from challenges, and we're going to get into that. But I became really passionate when I saw that it's something that impacted our entire family, not only my child, and I wanted it to be an easier process for children and families. So we're going to bring up a video this morning, and I want everyone to watch the video and keep in mind when you're watching it that it's a video from America's Funniest Videos. So the audience is laughing, and that struck me really as a parent of a child with feeding issues and as a therapist of how often families are misunderstood and children are misunderstood when they attend events or they go places. So the audience laughing was something I want you to cue into, but I want you to also look at the negotiations that are happening, how the parents are reading the children in terms of how well they stop, or do they push, or do they go into negotiations. So look at the negotiations and then take a look at the facial expressions of the children, the body posturing, and it's a good lead in to all of the things that we're going to talk about this morning. So let's bring this video up, and it will really be a good thing to look at before we start talking this morning.
Cookies, but you have to eat your veggies first.
I don't want more spaghetti.
Tyler, then I'm calling Aunt Jean.
No!
See, it's good, huh? Hey!
When am I going to throw up on the spaghetti?
You better not. I'm calling her. I'm fixing to dial her number right here.
So I guess it's this one.
Drink. What's the matter?
The lettuce is killing me.
Because you had to eat salad. How bad was it?
It's really bad.
Oh.
You want to know what's really?
I hate this.
You hate it? You said you hate this?
What's wrong? Why not? There's no poop on it. I would not serve you poop.
Hurry, go. You want me to count to 3?
No!
Okay, go.
Just go to 3.
1, 2, 3. Swallow it. Swallow it.
1 pea for all this ice cream. Have that 1 pea. We'll get all this ice cream.
No!
1 pea. Look. 1.
Here. This is better.
Just because her sister spit it out, you shouldn't spit it out.
Yeah, mommy and daddy been eating it.
So right there was a good example of all the things that can go awry during a mealtime and the negotiations that can start. And I'm not sure if I'm sure you noticed, Voices were getting raised, voices were getting escalated, children were crying, children were screaming. There were facial grimaces from kids. Kids were falling out of chairs. One child actually said, "This is killing me." And that is not uncommon. And in feeding therapy over the years, I have heard that from children. This is going to kill me. And that is truly how their sensory systems are perceiving that the food that is in front of them. And then we saw parents going into heavy duty negotiations, and we cut out even some of the really heavy duty negotiations because the video went on for so long. But we even saw a parent that was willing to take, if a child ate one pea, they were going to get a big carton of ice cream, right? So feeding can take us to different places as parents, and it's because it's instinctual for us to feed our children, to keep them healthy, to keep them thriving. And when that process is disrupted, it becomes a stressful event. And when it becomes a stressful event, it's hard for anybody to want to go back to the table. So I'm going to talk about a few things that parents are often told when they say they have a picky eater or a child that's not eating well. And one of the things they're often told is, don't worry, the body will just do it. It's the body's priority to eat. It actually isn't the body's priority to eat. The body's number one priority is to be able to hold itself up in space. So I'm standing here talking to you. If I can't stand up, I'm going to constantly be falling over. I'm going to hit my head. I'm not going to, I could possibly not survive. If you can't hold yourself up in space, then you can't survive. So that's your number one priority. Number two is respiratory. If you cannot breathe, you will not survive. So respiratory comes in before feeding and eating. If a child has respiratory needs or any kind of facial anomalies that are impacting respiratory, it can impact and make feeding hard. The other thing parents are often told, eating's easy. They're just going to go in there and eat. Don't worry. Just walk away. They're going to eat. That's actually not true. Eating requires every one of your internal organ systems, every one of your organ systems. It requires all of your muscle systems. It requires many of your cranial nerves, and it requires the coordination of all of your sensory systems. And when any of that is disrupted, it makes feeding difficult. So if a child is having difficulty with postural stability, and Patty's going to touch on that in a few minutes, if they're not able to hold themselves up in a chair, if they're an infant and they're starting to take in solids and they don't have good neck stability, that is going to make feeding difficult. Again, if you're talking about GI issues, respiratory issues, reflux, those difficulties with the organs can make feeding difficulty. It requires our muscle systems to be working in coordination. So neurological issues can make feeding difficulty. And then we get down to our sensory system, and we're looking at asking a child to take in their visual system, smell, touch, taste, interoception. We need all of those systems to be working well for them to be able to have a comfortable and enjoyable eating experience. When it is a challenge to eat, you do not want to come back and do it again. So I'm going to use an example. You go out to eat, you have your favorite meal, the meal that you've been waiting to eat for some time, but while you're eating it, you do not know that you have the stomach flu. You're enjoying it, and then an hour later, the stomach flu kicks in, and you get to see your meal in a completely different form 1 hour later. Then let's fast forward to the next morning after you've had several bouts of returning that meal in a different state, and your friend shows up with leftovers from the day before and says, let's sit down and eat. Are you going to sit down and eat? Some people will not return back to a meal after the stomach flu for months, for years. Sometimes they will not come back to that food at all. So we have to really think about when a child has a negative experience with a food and we turn around and ask them to eat it again the next day, we're going to get aversive reactions to foods. Okay, so that's eating is not easy. It is a very difficult process. We often think that eating is a two-step process. You sit down, go to the table, sit down and eat your food. It is not a two-step process. We ask children for every bite to really take on a multi-step process. This could be 20 to 30 steps. We're asking a child to walk into a room with the food. We're asking them to be able to sit at the table. And there our postural stability. And Patty and I are really going to talk about that a lot because it's truly important. It's one of the first steps to feeding when you get to the table. Then we're asking a child to be able to look at a food. And not just look at a food, we often put multiple colors of food on a plate. If you think about lasagna and salad, your visual system is really taking in many, many colors at that point. You're having to really discriminate between all of the colors and smells. So if you show up at a plate that has fish and something with vinegar in it, and you're really taking in a lot of smells. So when a child shows up to many foods on a plate, their sensory systems are really working hard. Then we have touch. Children are often fed at the beginning, but then we start asking them to use finger foods and touching. They have to be able to integrate all of that sensory information, and it feels satisfying to them. So at any point, if those when the sensory systems are working and integrating and it doesn't feel good, then it's not a positive experience, and a child typically will not want to come back to that experience again. And we often hear about feeding schedules and how we should schedule a feeding, and this food on a Monday and this food on a Wednesday, and then we alternate. Again, if a child has a negative experience and we stick right to the schedule and we keep presenting that food in the same format, in the same way that it was presented during the negative experience, we will not see that child return and have, a positive, good experience with the food. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about why children don't eat. We want to, and I touched on it just a minute ago, it's sensory disruption and sensory processing can impact the way a child eats. Oral motor challenges, and that is the way a child is able to move the muscles in the mouth to coordinate the feeding process. And I will tell you, children that are born on the NICU, parents are many years ago, things are changing, and we're really glad things are changing. It was gain a certain amount of weight and you get to go home. And at that time, we really weren't focused on skill set. It was about gain the weight, get home. And then we would see children often drop back down with weight again because they just didn't have the skill set to maintain the weight and the feedings that they were at the hospital. Now with a more, I would say a really good focus on maintaining skill set or having skill set while we're eating, we're seeing children have better oral motor abilities before they go home. Oral motor is really important. It helps us to be able to suck and swallow, breathe, suck, swallow. It helps children to be able to chew food, bite food and chew food, move food to the part of the mouth that triggers a swallow reflex. And if children are having difficulty for whatever reason, and it can be respiratory, it can be sensory, and it can be muscle or neurological. If they're having difficulty with the movement of the muscles in the mouth, it can impact how they eat, how comfortable it feels, if it feels scary, if it hurts, if they choke, And when you choke, we all know that doesn't feel good for quite a while. We have watery eyes, running nose, our respiratory system doesn't feel good, our throat doesn't feel good. So we really want to focus on the oral motor and the skill set, and any challenges in that area will impact feeding. And then respiratory and digestive challenges. We know that we often see children will have a G-tube, oxygen needs, and those challenges can really impact how children will eat and if they're willing to eat and their experience during eating. And I really want to emphasize a negative experience during eating, pain, challenges, fear will impact how a child comes back to the table and engages with food. And I want to go on to supporting children during feeding. Now I'm going to turn it over to Patty, who is fantastic with our postural stability. I've mentioned you have to have the muscle system. The muscle systems have to be working well, and any challenges can impact feeding, but also as parents, the chair we use, how we set children up for feeding really can impact a mealtime. And that's a simple thing right there in supporting a child getting ready to eat, is the posture and the feeding. So Patty, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Sure. So basically, the very first thing before anything else, when you are dealing with feeding, even if your kid's a great eater, we recommend that we get kids and parents alike into chairs that fit them and fit them well. If you're anything like me, I'm on the short side, and I often have a hard time finding a chair where I'm really comfortable. I go onto some of these great big overstuffed couches and my legs are dangling and I feel like I can't quite get it. I'm having to kind of lean on something to sort of give myself a little bit more support. And a lot of times we don't really think about that when we are talking about kids, and we just think, oh, well, they're kids. They can just sit anywhere. And so, I see families feeding their kids all different ways. And, it's not that it's all bad. Every family has a different style, but honestly, children are going to do better when they are in a position where they can be stable and pay attention, and they're not having to think about, am I leaning? Am I going to fall over? Can I breathe? Can I reach my food? A lot of times high chairs, you can look back and see, how you feed your kids, or how you fed your kids, or maybe the families that you're working with. And you can see a lot of high chairs have trays that come up to here on the kid. And so if you were to try to do your work and your hands are up here, imagine trying to type or eat or anything with your hands way up here. And so I want to give you guys some pointers about what to look for. And there is actually in the chat, and you can go back later and it will be on the video, just a website that'll kind of go through the process, and it gives some ideas of great chairs to use. And a lot of times families may not want to invest. They're thinking, I'm just going to get a booster chair and call it good. And by the time that my child is 2, they can sit in a regular adult chair. And actually, you're going to have so much better luck if you start from the beginning and get a decent chair, and preferably one that can grow with your child. I had a hard time investing in a chair myself. I was just thinking, but I can honestly tell you that the chairs that we bought have adjustable seating and footrest. And to this day, we've had them for 20 years, and I still enjoy sitting in that chair because it's got a footrest, and it sits me up at the table, and so even though it's a kid's chair, it supports adult weight. And so I feel like I got every penny's worth out of that chair. So just think about that and consider that when you're looking for chairs. But the most important thing that you need to consider is how the chair fits your child. And so I'm going to see if I can do this. It's going to be a little tricky. Let's see. All right, so you want to make sure that you've got good back support and that your hip is at a 90-degree angle, okay? And so most high chairs, the child usually sits like this with their feet, you know, out or just dangling, because there's usually either the footrest on the high chair is much too low and it doesn't do them any good, or if you have your child in there to the age that they can fit, then it's high and they tend to push back, and it's not great. And then we talk about the hips being at 90 degrees. We also want the knees to be at 90 degrees. And if you have the option, if you have to go with one or the other, it's better to go less than 90 degrees instead of with dangling feet. And so you want your hips, feet, your hips, ankles, and knees all at 90 degrees. And then you want the surface of, you know, the table or the tray where you can just rest your arms lightly. So it can be 90 degrees, somewhere in there where your arms can just rest nicely on there. And so that's the main things to look for. And a lot of these chairs are little, the chairs that we really like are wooden chairs. They're more expensive. They can run about $200, which is a lot, but you can find them used. And I will tell you from personal experience, it has been worth every penny. You know, your child will stay seated longer. And, you know, as for a small infant, you may need to have a special insert in there. If you have a high chair and you're not going to invest that much money because you already have, you know, this high chair, there are things that you can do to still get that foot support, and make sure that the child is at the right height at the table or the tray. You can either raise them up a little bit, you know, using a firm cushion or some towels or a thick book. And you can also just make sure they have, there's different ways that you can do it to get a footrest underneath their feet. And that's something that, you know, if you needed specifics on your particular high chair, you know, you could call Las Cumbres and there would be somebody that could help you walk you through that.
And that footrest is so important. I talk about, and when you're talking about the wooden chair or the supports, if you have a child that's squirming, if you put them in an adult chair and they're 2 and you ask them to eat, it would be like me asking you to eat on a ledge where you didn't know if you were going to fall left or right. You were trying to keep your balance. And then you were trying to have all these multi-organ, multi-muscle, multi-sensory coordination going on at the same time while you're trying not to fall left or right, while you're trying not to fall forward. Because remember, the body's number one priority is to be able to hold itself up in space. So that's why we really took this time to show you, to talk to you about postural stability. If you have a child that's jumping up from the table left and right and running and runs around the table and comes back, this is your number one place to start right there, is with postural stability and seating, because you might be able to help them to feel secure and safe. And then all of those multi-sensory organ, muscle, cranial nerve coordination pieces that need to come into play are able to do their job. But if a child is worried about falling over, then they're going to not be able to sit and allow the systems to do what the systems need to do. You know, Patty, in the old days, I took old phone books and I would duct tape them and I would give them to parents to be able to give that proprioceptive feedback under the foot. And when you have that feedback, you know where you are in space. Am I correct on that?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Right. And you all could try it. I mean, we could try it now, or you could try it later. I don't know. Julie, I don't know if we have time for that, or if we want to.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So, so wherever you are, wherever you're sitting,
And then I have a little bar stool, so that works really well.
yeah, it's if you can imagine when if you're short like I am, and you go to sit at a bar and the bar stool doesn't have a rung for your feet, it's very uncomfortable to stay there for very long. And so we're going to try to model that, if you will. And so, I've got this fancy desk chair that I've got, and it goes up and down, but I'm going to raise it up high so that I no longer have my feet on the ground. And I'm going to scoot a little bit forward because the chair's too big. I need to get close up to the table because otherwise it's too far. So I don't have the back support. I don't have foot support. And now my hands are up here. And that's often how we are asking our children to eat. And so you can feel how it is just, it's not comfortable. Your brain is thinking to yourself, oh, I've got to get stable here. And so you'll find kids getting, they'll either stiffen or they'll try to lock themselves. They might lean back. They might try to hold on. They might put their hands on the table and just kind of hold on for dear life. So if you can eliminate that postural insecurity by giving them a chair that supports them properly, you are already gonna, give yourself the best chance at success for meal times.
And we often will ask, a child will be hanging on with their dominant hand, and then we question why they're not able to pick food up and eat, right? They're stabilizing themselves. So many of the feeding recommendations really need to be individualized in feeding therapy by a trained feeding specialist. But this is one thing that we can tell you, start with that. That is a very good step to being able to support a child in the best way. I'm going to pull up a couple of pictures of kids eating, and we're going to talk a little bit about reading your child's cues during mealtime. Okay, this is a great picture. I thought it was cereal, it might be fruit, but right there, if I saw a child in feeding therapy, I would know that something is not appealing with this food in the child. It could be the metal spoon. Maybe this child's clicked their teeth and hurt themselves with a metal spoon. It could be the bowl. It could be the food. It could be, if it is cereal, it could be that there are two foods mixed together, a milk and a cereal. There are many different things that can cause a child to have these aversive reactions, and being able to read those reactions, trying to push a child to keep eating once they have this, posturing and facial expression, really, you're just getting into negotiations and headbutting at this point. Let's go to a different picture. We're going to go to a different picture. All right. Right there, let's look at, hand posturing, facial posturing, body posturing, moving off to the side, hands are up, mouth is crying. Right there, we're looking at an aversive reaction. And if a parent were to keep pushing, you can flood a child until they'll just eat the food. And at that point, you have just taught the child to eat one food, or you can work on the various textures and taste of food until you've taught the child to eat a variety. So if you push through it, and I don't know if this is green peas or green beans, this child will learn to eat green beans through a process of negotiations or just accepting it until they just are, don't have a choice. Or you can work on green foods with various tastes and textures that feel comfortable until a child is really able to work and eat green foods. Okay, let's go to a different picture. All right, I like this picture. Let's look at the differences in the facial expressions that are happening. The child before, clearly food was on his face and he was not happy. He was really facial grimacing. And now we have a child that's just covered and wearing food. And when we talk about the 25 steps to eating, she's looking at her food. She's sitting at the table with her food. She's posture looks really good. She is looking at her food. We know she's smelling her food because it's all over her nose. She's wearing her food. She's touching it with her fingers. It looks like all the fingers have spaghetti on them. Even the palms of her hands have spaghetti on them. She has it on her, it looks like her left shoulder. She has it up around her neck. She has food on her cheeks, her lips, her nose, her forehead has spaghetti on it, and her lips. So we know that she's well on her way to those, working through those 25 steps to eating. Now we're not seeing her chew it and swallow it, so we don't know how her oral motor is going. But from a sensory standpoint, the sensory components are integrating and she's doing really well. And we're seeing a smile and some happiness. So that, if you were reading a child's cue, you would know to keep going. This is working. We're not force feeding. There's enjoyment. This is a child who's probably going to come back and eat some spaghetti. I think about her visual piece. She's probably loving all these strings that are hanging off of the fork, and how fun is that? So she's getting a lot of great input, and chances are she's going to come back. Let's look at the next picture. Love this one. Again, let's look at postural stability. I mean, I'm questioning for this photo shoot whether they put a towel or something right under where he's sitting, because the tray is at really the height we want a tray to be for a child who's eating at a high chair. And this child is well on the way to the 25 steps to feeding. Again, looking at, well, he's not looking at the food, but we know at some point had to, the way the bowl was on the head, motor skills to get the bowl on the head, smelling it, touching it, wearing it, many parts of the body are engaged. Food is on the lips. I'm going to assume probably in the mouth, maybe not. I mean, this is a child that could be working up to being able to put food in the mouth, and might not have happened yet, but those are the steps. These are the many steps that a child has to work through. So, okay, we can stop with that picture. So supporting children, postural stability, reading their cues, reading their sensory system, knowing what foods cause aversive reactions. And it doesn't mean that you don't present that food again, but trying to read into what could have been aversive. So if peas didn't appeal the first time, it doesn't mean that kids don't like all green foods, right? It just means that something about peas did not work that time. Maybe it was warm. Maybe it was the way they smashed. I have offered peas frozen, in a frozen form, when kids get old enough and have the oral motor strength, because it goes from a squishy food to a crunchy food when they're a little frozen. Again, an infant should not be doing that. I'm talking a toddler who has the oral motor ability to crunch the crunchy food and swallow it. But you can change foods. And when I hear people say, "Oh, my kid doesn't eat green foods," well, I bet they would eat, a green veggie stick, might not eat a green bean, but they might eat, as a toddler, a green veggie stick, which is a real gateway and an opening to get to green beans, because you're reinforcing, my child likes green. Oh, you like green food. I see that's a veggie stick. It's a green food. It's a stick. It's a green stick. And then that's your gateway to working into things like green beans. And I think vegetables come up the most. So being postural stability, reading your child's cues, supporting the sensory system, visual, smell, touch, and taste, and supporting the oral motor system. So a lot, I get a lot of questions about baby-led weaning, when to start certain foods, and I always go back to, and it is very specific, and I would never make any type of recommendation that for children in general. Every child, should be, they're individualized. So I would never make a blanket recommendation, but make sure that they're able to tolerate it, handle it, and they have the skill set to be able to handle certain foods. So if you give a child a food, they have a negative reaction, a choking episode, or they can't handle it, we hope that they can spit it out. But if they don't have that skill set yet, then you're jumping a little bit ahead and you put them at risk for having an aversive reaction during a meal, and you might lose that food. It might not be something they go back to. So always make sure that those systems that we talked about are able to handle the foods that you're presenting. The other piece, Patty and I we talked about this. We want to make sure that parents are aware of this today. What we're talking about are general ideas. It's in no way a substitution for seeing your physician if you have any concerns about feeding. The first place that you should always start if you have any concerns about nutrition or feeding is with your pediatrician. And then at that point, they will make recommendations from a medical standpoint and therapeutically. And I just wanted to go ahead, Patty.
I was just going to say, when do you think somebody should see a specialist? I mean, let's just say that they've got a child who just won't touch vegetables, or who is gagging, or.
Yeah. Well, first of all, see a pediatrician always. And then secondly, you can make that recommendation to have more with your pediatrician for more therapeutic input, support. I always say when a child is having poor weight gain, when, they've been picky, you're at the doctor and you've been reporting multiple times there's picky eating going on, then it's time to really start to ask for support from a specialist. When they're having difficulty transitioning from baby foods to solids, or from milk, breast or bottle, into solids, and that's often reflexive for the first 1 to 4 months, and becomes more voluntary for babies in the 4 to 6 month range. And when they're not able to make that transition, then it's a good time to see a specialist. And when they just can't wean off baby food, that's also a good time. As children get older, if they have 20, and we're talking toddlers on in through 6 years of age, if they have 20 or less foods in their diet, it's good to be able to see a specialist. And that means, I can eat pizza with different crusts. I can eat pizza from different restaurants. It doesn't mean I just eat pizza from the same restaurant the same way. That it's 20, we want to see 20 or more foods eaten in a variety. Reflux, vomiting, throwing up during meals, that's a red flag to see a physician right away, and then start working through the process of working with a specialist, feeding specialist. All right, where are we on time? Do we want to open up for any questions?
Does anybody have any particular questions that they want to ask?
Really, the best thing to do would be to start with a feeding specialist. And then at that point, you really start diving into the technicals. And I want to just, I needed to go back and acknowledge, I'm sequential oral sensory approach trained. I'm trained in many techniques to feeding therapy. There's behavioral techniques and there's sensory techniques. I really lean, Dr. Kay Toomey and Dr. Aaron Ross, I trained with them out of the Sensory Integration Center in Denver, and follow them constantly for more updates. And much of what I'm talking about today, I learned in their training. And that deals with the sensory system. And when we go into working on feeding therapy, there's so many questions we have to ask at the beginning so that we can start finding out what really could be impacting a child's feeding. And I always like to have our OTs come in and help with a sensory profile, which lets us know what really on the sensory system, where is the breakdown? Is it taste? Is it touch? Is it vision? Is it vestibular? What could really be impacting a child and their feeding? So every child is so unique and so specific. But if it's something that's impacting the daily life of the family and him, and you have concerns about what this could look like in a few years, it's definitely worth letting the pediatrician know you're ready to see a specialist.
It is very important to talk to the doctor. However, I will also tell you that sometimes you have to go, if you're not getting a referral, like let's just say your doctor says, oh, they'll get over it. Don't worry about it. No, I'm worried about it. This is a problem. Then what you might have to do is you might have to see if you can figure out a feeding specialist that you can go to and go backwards and say, make contact with that person and then say, I need to how do I get a referral from my doctor to see you? Do you know what I'm saying? If for some reason your pediatrician doesn't know where to refer you or doesn't believe maybe that it's that big a deal, but you're still frustrated and feeling like it is, you can call us Cumbres and we can try to point you in the right direction. You can look in the phone, you can do a search on the web and see what you can find. So don't hesitate if you kind of hit a brick wall.
But when you were talking about needing to go to a specific store to get a certain food in the specific wrapper, that is one thing that I probably should have brought up, and had we had more time, I would talk about more under supporting a child with feeding. When a child sees the same wrapper come out, so when you're preparing a meal, and maybe you're going to use pancakes from a certain box or waffles from a certain box, see if you can slip up when you're introducing something new or trying to see if you can have the child not see the wrapper. Marketing is really big. Cheerios box, I mean, it's the first thing you see when you go down the cereal aisle. It's big, and they're even making the boxes bigger and bigger. Doritos, and I always say, the easiest food in the world to eat, the puffy Cheetos, because it just melts in your mouth. So if you can make some preparations or introduce new foods without the wrapper being introduced, and then change it up if you can. So if you offer mac and cheese, one brand, I'm not going to say brands on this, but if you offer one brand week one, maybe try to offer a second brand the second week and see what happens. Don't always offer the same thing. I've learned as a parent, when I go to the store, if I need mac and cheese for the next few weeks, I change it up. It might be the elbow macaroni one week, and it might be shells the next. And it's really good to be able to make those changes as you're starting to introduce foods. That's a little advice going forward, as you might start to, if you see your child take on a food that they like, how can you change it up a little bit in the next couple of weeks so they don't get stuck on it, they don't jag on it. Have that wrapper, that food with that temperature, and we see that's common. And wrappers and marketing is powerful. It'll draw them right back. They'll remember.
We're just about to the end of our time. You can always check the Las Cumbres website to see, what other, you can ask questions on the website and somebody will get back to you if you have a particular question about any particular topic involving your children. We are having another Ask the Specialist in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be what to look for and why it's important to identify autism early. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.